Hello and welcome to Amagi, hosted by myself, Nima Mahjour of economicsjunkie.com and Dylan Moore of the Volitional Science Network, which you can find on YouTube. We are here to tackle ideas both ancient and modern in an effort to bring you the tools needed to expand the power of your worldview, making you a more potent entity professionally, politically, philosophically, or otherwise. We are graciously being hosted by the Think Liberty Network, which you can find at think-liberty.com. This is episode 18, Bernie Sanders' 10-point manifesto. Hi, Dylan.
Hi, Nima. I'm pretty excited about this.
Yes.
I bet all 10 points of these are Orange Man bad, right? Point 1,
Possibly,
Orange Man
yeah.
bad. Point 2, Orange Man bad.
Although Sanders is also he almost looks a little more reddish than orange sometimes when he gets worked up.
Yeah. But no, in fact, all 10 points are not Orange Man bad, which is, I guess, why we thought it was interesting enough to do a show on.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's important for Democrats to actually have a plan and have ideas instead of just throwing tantrums. So we welcome that.
Yeah. So did you want to go over these one at a time?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah. You go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Well, and so just to say where we're getting this from, I found this article on truthdig.com that appears to be a progressive media outlet, and they're all excited about Bernie Sanders coming out with this new 10-point plan. And it opens up, before we even get to the 10 points, about Sanders writes that while it is clear a majority of the American people, in quotes, rejected President Trump's agenda benefiting the wealthy and powerful, as well as his racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, and religious bigotry, he says it is not good enough for Democrats to just be the anti-Trump party. So even though we just gave Bernie Sanders a compliment, I think we have to take it back, because they're still hitting the social justice warrior button as hard as they goddamn can.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
Like, yeah, I'm an Iranian immigrant in this country, and I haven't experienced any racism from Trump. But go on, white man from Vermont, lecture me about how the orange man is so racist.
Well, I could throw racist slurs at you during this show if that makes you feel like you're getting more of the American experience I was told that you would be having when I went to elementary school.
I can work with that, yeah.
Okay. So anyway, point 1, Bernie Sanders, I think one of his favorite subjects is the $15 an hour minimum wage. So this, I believe, is his quote. The article has it in quotes, so I think this is what he actually wrote and or said. So 1, increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour and indexing it to median wage growth thereafter. The current federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour is a starvation wage that must be increased to a living wage, at least $15 an hour. This would give more than 40 million Americans a raise and would generate more than $100 billion in higher wages throughout the country. When you want to start on the 15 there, Nima, or you want to start on that index?
Yeah, so the 15, I mean, I don't think that this is hitting or striking the root of the problem, because the root of the problem is that we have austerity going on, and that is because we have we have taxes that are too high, / we have a deficit that is too low, and that is causing unemployment, and the unemployment is making unskilled labor uncompetitive. So if we can address that issue and let the market deal with the wages paid to the workers, then we would get to a much more desirable outcome for everyone involved. It could be $15, it could be more. Maybe in some areas you can have entry-level positions for a little less. But the $15 is just a talking point, I think, for lazy people who like to work.
It is. Well, and particularly when he uses these terms, starvation wage. And I know we're on a libertarian channel, and you guys all know what we're talking about here. But this idea that you're entitled to a certain amount of money for you to have a certain set of living standards, regardless of your situation. Like, even if you're a 16-year-old working during the summer, living at your parents' house, like, you should have a minimum wage the same as for someone who's expected to support a family. The differences between these things never were clear to me. And then when he says, sorry, I just want to finish this, when he says it must be increased to a living wage, and then he says at least $15 an hour, we still don't have the description of what a living wage actually is. He just throws a number out there. So I agree. It's a talking point.
What if somebody wants to work for $8 an hour or at $7.25 an hour? Is Bernie Sanders going to walk into the room and say, no, you're not doing that, I don't allow it? I mean, it's just, even just philosophically, you have to be such a mentally ill control freak to be wanting to tell people how much they have to pay in a voluntary arrangement. It doesn't make any sense to me.
I agree. And although I do want to throw this out there, because I've heard Warren Moser say this, and I've heard a lot of progressive MMTers say it, and I get the argument. And it goes something like this, which is that when you start paying employees more, and this of course is an argument from the aggregate, if you start paying employees more, those employees are going to spend that income in a business. Now, if a business has not reached its capacity, one of the easiest things to think of is a restaurant, where if we've got a restaurant set up, we got everybody hired, and everything ready to go. It's a machine that's worked out, and there's just not enough people coming in to buy food. Well, you're going to have to start laying people off. Well, if we take the reverse of that and we say, okay, it's packed, from open to close, and you're just raking the money in at full capacity. Even if the minimum wage goes up, you're not going to start firing anybody because you're generating income at full capacity. So, however, even if that's true, which I think that's a valid argument to make, to say that if we raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and in this case, if we compare it to the federal, that's doubling it, or more than doubling it. $7.25 is a little less than half of 15.
Well, it's generally not even really applicable, because most states and localities, almost all of them, are in fact above it anyway.
Right. For example, in Washington, it's more like 11 where I'm at. Or if you're in Seattle, it's already at 15.
Yeah. San Francisco too. I mean, scheduled out to be there soon.
But what do you think of the argument there, where you say, okay, it's okay to raise the minimum wage because they're going to turn it around and spend that, and that's beneficial for everybody?
Well, I think that's not necessary. That would be the case. That could be the case in a scenario where the $15 minimum wage would be obsolete to begin with. So if we have enough growth, if we have a large enough net private savings, and if labor is short, then employers would have to bid the unskilled labor higher, and they would have to pay higher wages automatically. So in that case, we wouldn't need a $15 minimum wage. But if we're under austerity, and then we impose a $15 minimum wage, then what's most likely going to happen is that businesses aren't going to hire to begin with at that wage.
Right.
You can't tell, like, what's it worth to a business? Tell them, but if you pay that worker more, you see, then they're going to spend it more, and that way you are going to. I mean, no businessman's going to believe that, because it's nonsense.
I agree. That's why I emphasize in the aggregate. When it comes to an individual business, it's like
exactly. But the individual business doesn't care about the aggregate.
Right. No, I was thinking the same thing, where this is kicking a can around when the major problem is the fact that there's not enough private sector net savings.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
Furthermore, the second half of this, which is indexing the median wage to growth thereafter, I actually made my own video about these 10 points on my channel. And when I said what I'm about to say, I got some progressive people listening to my channel. They criticized me for this. They said, Dylan, you're bad at math. Because here's what I said. I said, if you increase the minimum wage, let's just take this $7.25, even though the states are higher, usually. Let's say we increase the minimum wage from $7.25 to $15 an hour. Well, what you're going to do is you're going to move the median up, which is going to move the minimum wage up, which is going to move the median up, which is going to move the minimum wage up, and you're actually going to create a spiral, which is
That's a feedback loop. Yeah, it's a self-referencing equation almost.
Right. So I was criticized for being bad at math because they said, no, Dylan, if you increase the median, the people on the low end, they just get a higher number. And because it's not an average, it's a median, not a mean, you're not actually shifting the location of where that median is. And I'm like, guys, the people at the bottom get fired, and then the median moves over. This isn't that. No, my math's fine. You just don't get the concept.
Right.
And we didn't mention this yet. So obviously, we're talking modern money theory here for people who haven't heard us before, and call us socialist or whatever. We're not. We're just observing the fact that money systems have worked a certain way throughout history, and the Austrian or typical libertarian description of it isn't accurate in our humble opinions. Check out episode 1 for more information on that. But one of the head MMT proponents right now, her name is Stephanie Kelton, is actually Bernie Sanders' economic advisor. Right now.
I think she was.
Oh, really?
Well, when he was running, she was on the committee, on the advisory committee, I believe. I don't know if she's at the moment. It may well be, but not.
I thought the that federal job guarantee thing for $15 an hour that Bernie came up with was one of her brainchilds.
Yeah.
Am I confusing facts?
Well, when did he come up with it? Did he come up during the campaign?
No, it was about a year ago. Maybe 6 months to a year ago.
Yeah, could be. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, my point is that
she was definitely affiliated with him, so that's what matters.
Definitely. And so one of the head MMT proponents who should know about these feedback loops, particularly, I mean, we've even had Warren Mosler on my show, me, Nima, and Warren, who's the head MMT guy, described that one of the most hyperinflationary things you could do is index wages to something, like consumer price indexes or whatever, because as soon as that index goes up, your wages go up, which is going to affect the index, and you'll very quickly get into a spiral. So, yeah, I don't know if Bernie just doesn't get MMT or he's just sticking with his talking points because he knows his constituents won't get it.
I think we do know the answer. So, yeah, I mean, there's the argument that a lot of the left-leaning MMTers make is that the share of capital income versus labor income has been going up consistently for the past decades of neoliberalism. And that's certainly true. The question is, what are the causes of that? For example, Minsky, whom we've discussed in 2 episodes now, and we're going to have another one coming up. He says that that's because because there's no federal job guarantee. Number one, because of austerity, which affects low-income earners the most, and because of huge military spending, etc. Those types of government spending that only benefit corporations and profit type of incomes. But these corporations have been put into a polistic or monopolistic position to an extent, so they can sort of dictate how much they keep and how much they pay out. But also, of course, because of unemployment. Because say unskilled labor is easy to find because of unemployment. And even though we're now officially at 4% or 3.9% or whatever, the true unemployment rate is much higher. And that's been hidden from the statistics for a while.
Yeah, because, I mean, the unemployment rate as they pick it out now, it's what if you've been unemployed for longer than 3 months, you're no longer considered unemployed because you haven't been looking for work. It's something, it's like 3 months and you're no longer considered unemployed. So there's, like you said, there's some massive number of people who I think would be working if they had the opportunity. That is a lot more than 4%.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, if I wanted to be generous towards Bernie Sanders' argument here for the $15 minimum wage, the economy would have to be highly monopolized. The corporations would have to be in a position to retain profits at will and pay out low wages. And we do have that situation to an extent. So maybe it would work under these conditions for a little bit to raise the minimum wage to $15. However, you're not addressing the root cause of the issue, and I'd rather be addressing the root cause.
Of course. Shall we move on? We're only at number one, although I think number one requires a lot of unpacking. So number two, a Democratic favorite, a path toward Medicare for all, socialized healthcare. The Medicare for All bill, widely supported in the Senate, has a 4-year phase-in period on the way to guaranteeing health care for every man, woman, and child. Over the first year, it would lower the Medicare eligibility age from 65 to 55, cover dental, hearing, and vision care for seniors, provide health care to every young person in the United States, and lower the cost of prescription drugs. Now, the government can totally afford this.
How are you going to pay for it? No, I'm just kidding.
No, I've really had to grapple with this concept now that I understand.
This is the libertarian cliche, right? Or the Republican cliche. But how are you going to pay for it? Well, that's a stupid argument. Whether you agree with Medicare for all or not, that's not a good argument because of how federal and public funding actually works.
Correct. Yeah, the government just comes out of it with nowhere the same way they spend everything. There's no such thing as tax money for that the federal government spends, or borrowed money that the federal government spends. It just issues money to spend it, and when it takes in taxes, it just destroys that money. So, however, despite the fact that the government can afford it, that doesn't mean they should buy it. So, what's your first criticism of the idea of Medicare for all, Nima?
Well, I mean, I don't think the government is pretty good at anything they do. So, Medicare for all, just to me personally, in my political opinion, would be bad for the quality of healthcare. I would rather have a competitive healthcare market than a completely government-run market. Now, it says here Medicare for all specifically. So, okay, what is Medicare? Medicare is the health program for seniors, correct?
Yes. So, essentially, once you turn 65, I think it is, and I think you might be able to get it if you're disabled, but that might be Medicaid, something like that. Let's just...
Okay, so then we already have Medicare for all, don't we?
What do you mean?
Well, we already have, every senior is eligible for Medicare.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. I think what they mean is Medicare for all now.
Here, provide health care to every young person in the U.S. and lower the cost of prescription drugs. Well, okay, I mean, he throws in the lower the cost of prescription drugs in the end there. I don't know how. I mean, that would have to be described.
That's another one of his points. We'll get to that one later.
Okay, so then that's a separate point, I guess. But one big thing that I want to say to this, this could be a very successful political talking point, because Medicare really does suck. I mean, any healthcare in this country does suck, and same applies in many other countries. And the reason, in my opinion, is because it's been so monopolized, and drug prices have been pushed up so much because of government legislation and FDA requirements. It takes you 15 years to bring a drug to market, etc.
And $1 billion.
Exactly. And so, but also, it's very hard to open a hospital in this country. You have to jump through tons of hoops. And a doctor, we can go to college loans and how much debt these doctors are. And so they have to charge high prices to pay off their debts. There's a lot of issues that are tied to government intervention in healthcare. It's the current healthcare system in the U.S. is a disastrous public-private patchwork of some certain monopolistic providers or companies
that controlling everything,
charging high prices, government intervening. So the thing is, I've always said this I've been saying this for a while. Personally, I don't even know. This is such a giant jungle and such a big mess that maybe a publicly run healthcare system that is just simple and plain and just basically a clean slate, maybe it would suck less. I honestly don't know.
I think it would. I think it would be better temporarily.
Yeah.
And so, for the same reasons that we've been talking about in the Evolution of Civilization miniseries, regarding the institutionalization of instruments, I think that, quick recap of that. An instrument is an organization that a society puts together to achieve a certain task. So, for example, the healthcare industry is supposed to be an organization with a task of making us healthy. An instrument becomes institutionalized means that whatever the organization's task was, it will eventually become secondary to the organization serving its own needs. And the organization will develop a group of vested interests that are so focused on serving their own needs, the original task might not even be secondary. It might even be contradictory to what the vested interests want. And this argument, our historical argument that we were making, is that this process applies to every organization humans can create. It's a natural process for a variety of reasons. Check out the Evolution of Civilization miniseries to hear more about that. But I think that government naturally institutionalizes much, much faster. So I think what would happen if we got a nationalized healthcare system is that for maybe even a decade or two, it would work fantastically, specifically when you compare it to what's going on now, because now it's such a fucking shit show. It would work fantastically. However, not only would it freeze itself in time, because now anything in government requires either legislative or bureaucratic efforts to change. It's not like you're a company to be like, well, that didn't work yesterday, let's try something new today. You can't do any of that. What that does is it allows vested interests to get really nestled in there and prevent change from, benefiting themselves. Furthermore, I really think one of the fundamental problems of the healthcare system today is the government control over the definition of health.
Exactly.
So, because the argument in the political sphere has always been who's going to pay for it. I'm asking, what is it? Yeah. What is the it that we're paying for? Because I understand this is all anecdotal, but I've heard, and not just heard, I've been involved with with my dad and my uncle and my grandfather and other people that I've met who've come up with very chronic illnesses. My aunt died of pancreatic cancer a few years ago, where the doctors are literally just guessing. They don't know. They don't have the evidence of what the problem actually is. So they say, well, I think it's this. So we're going to try this crazy experimental $100,000 a month treatment to treat this disease that I haven't actually diagnosed for.
Yeah. Well, and the incentives are so skewed. I mean, if you don't have competition in the market and you're just going to try to go for the most expensive items and you're going to make a killing off of it. And if you make your patients sicker, then even better. So you have an extended maintenance contract if you look at it from a business perspective.
A definition of a vested interest right there.
Yeah.
And the incentives are set up, would be set up to attract those people immediately.
The people who demand this kind of stuff, healthcare for all, Medicare for all, or whatever, they never want to have a conversation with me about the danger of vaccines. How come I can't talk with them about, okay, the guy who invented the polio vaccine admitted later on that, tons and tons of batches had cancer viruses in them and actually affected people adversely? Or what about immunologists who have gone on the record to state that the flu shots are worse than useless because they have bacteria excrements in them that totally mess with your system? Just the other day, a friend of mine told me, and
they come with 25 milligrams of mercury. Sorry for interrupting.
Mercury, etc. But apparently I can't talk about that, and they'll declare me a crazy person for that. So if those are the kinds of people who want to take over the medical system with Medicare for all, then I have a serious issue with that. Talk to me about serious issues that I'm concerned with, and then we'll see if you can take over a multi-trillion-dollar healthcare industry. How about that? A friend of mine just told me she has a weird autoimmune reaction to the flu shot she just took. Severe joint pain in her hands. I mean, you hear stories like this over and over and over. But if you bring it up, you're crazy and you're dangerous, actually. And there are even movements in California to force parents to inject their kids so they can go to school. Otherwise, they're not allowed to go to school. Yep. So if those are the kinds of people who are going to take over Medicare for all, then I have a serious issue with what you consider care. Because if you don't give a shit, then I don't see any care.
Yeah. Well, I want to give another example from my side here. Is wheat and grains. I didn't realize this because how would you going through the public educational system? Wheat, all these heart problems that we're having.
It's carbs, huh?
As a society. Well, specifically, gluten, it's wheat. Wheat, gluten totally fucks up your intestinal tract.
Yeah.
Because it causes leaky gut syndrome. I don't know if it causes leaky gut syndrome, but it affects it. It makes your gut leaky. I don't know what it has to be before you call it leaky gut syndrome. But if you're essentially introducing shit into your bloodstream because you're eating a bunch of gluten, well, obviously that's going to lower your immune system ability to defend itself. And if we have a system where it's set up where the FDA comes out with, is it the FDA that comes out with the food pyramid?
I believe so.
Healthy whole grains. Healthy whole grains. You got to eat your healthy whole grains. Cheerios are good for your heart. Healthy whole grains. The government said healthy whole grains.
This is again. So this is the public school system, which we're apparently supposed to worship and venerate, having whole grains and grains and wheat. Almost at the very bottom, right up above fruits and vegetables, which, by the way, fruits and fruit juice is showing up there for some reason, which is totally just sugar and it's not good for you. But anyway,
right.
So that's the shit that they tell us. They tell our kids who don't know any better to eat. Okay, so how much do you really care? Or once again, are you just concerned with creating permanent maintenance contracts?
Yeah.
For the healthcare industry?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Instead of us talking about who's going to pay for the heart surgery, let's talk about
how can you be healthier?
Well, how do we avoid 90% of the heart surgeries in the first place?
How can you be healthier?
It's a very, very, very simple. So, blah. Nima, we just took another 15 minutes for another point. So, yeah, even though the government can afford it, I think it's a horrible, horrible idea. Okay.
Oh my God.
Bold. Yeah, number 3. We're going to go off again here. Oh, boy. Number 3, bold action to combat climate change. The report from the International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, totally reliable information, has made it clear that we have just 12 years, Nima. It's 12 years now.
Oh, boy.
To substantially cut the amount of carbon in our atmosphere, or the planet will suffer irreversible damage. Congress must pass legislation that shifts our energy system away from fossil fuels and toward energy efficient and renewable energy. We can lead the planet in combating climate change and in the process create millions of good paying jobs. Bait and switch, motherfucker. Did you see that? Woohoo! Millions of good paying jobs. Don't listen to anything I just said before that. Just sign.
It's here. Like, yeah. So, okay. And if that wasn't enough, then there's also good paying jobs. So, sign at the dotted line. Exactly.
So, did you want to say something very quickly about the IPCC?
So the IPCC is a governmental organization. It's actually the intra-government.
The UN.
It is the UN, yeah, which is, taxpayer funded. And they produce a report every 4 years, I believe, called the Climate Doomsday Freakout Report. No, I think something else, but I forgot the name. I don't care. But they are
Armageddon
full
report.
of bureaucrats. Actually, here's just one little bullet point from the Politically Incorrect Guide on Climate Change. In one UN meeting, 2 scientists were outnumbered by more than 40 bureaucrats. So also, they always produce a very lengthy report. I think it's the climate assessment. That's whatever it's called. I don't know. But they always produce a very lengthy report that goes into a lot of details, a lot of caveats, and then they produce the idiot version, or I think it's actually called the summary for policymakers. But I like to call it the summary for complete idiots who don't want to read too much because they're lazy and they need talking points to scare the crap out of their constituents. So, and they reach conclusions by committee vote. They are notorious for bullying and kicking out dissenting scientists over and over. There are actually several whistleblowers that you can look up. Just look up IPCC whistleblowers. And they have a mission, and that mission is to declare humanity the enemy of humanity, so that way they can impose legislation to reduce anything that facilitates life on Earth, facilitate industry, facilitate growth, facilitates having children. I mean, this is not me making this up. These are already now becoming talking points in this country, have for long been talking points in Europe. I was actually born and raised in Germany. I remember when the Red-Green Coalition imposed the so-called Ökosteuer, the ecology tax, and it's just a carbon tax. So this is all just austerity through the back door. This is how anything. If you're an MMT advocate and you are parroting this unspeakable horse shit about catastrophic man-made climate change, your entire purpose has been 100% derailed. You're worse than useless because you're taking people along, which is, along for the ride as far as combating austerity goes, but you're reimposing austerity through climate change legislation, through man-made climate change propaganda. And science, as the people who say that the science on the matter is settled and the debate is over are exclusively people who have never had a debate on the matter. I've never seen any of
and are exclusively people who don't understand the scientific method, because part of points of the scientific method is literally the debate is never over. There's no such thing.
This is a religion. This is why it's so difficult, because for the layman, they use the word science and there's scientific institutions, and the IPCC, oh my God, they have some science on the panel. So they must be, everything they say must be gospel. But it's so contradictory. It's such a perversion of science. It's disgusting to watch it. And it's disgusting for people to use the veneer of and the cover of science to push completely dogmatic doomsday cult religion, cultist religious ideas, which is what they're doing. We have 12 years, okay? Well, in the 1970s, it was 12 years or 20 years. In the 1990s, I mean, we always have some number of years before doomsday.
And it never happens.
It never happens. Always wrong. But the legislation always happens, and the legislation always stays, and it doesn't matter in the end, because they've propagandized you into supporting it, and when all is said and done, it'll all be too late. So science has a lot to say on the topic. Like I can go on for hours and hours reading quotes from peer-reviewed scientific research papers that confirm that CO2 is not a significant driver of climate change on this planet. Everything you hear skips, every climate propagandist skips over this point. That they tell you, oh my God, look, the IPCC says that that warming can produce catastrophic weather. Or when it wasn't warming anymore, it was just change. Just any change is catastrophic, which basically just everything's catastrophic, no matter what happens. But if human activity is not causal to it, it doesn't matter. Because what they're pushing is a carbon tax. What they're pushing is reducing the output of carbon dioxide. What they're pushing is,
which is austerity. Because carbon dioxide, first of all, it's simply one of the elements of life. It's up there with water.
Well, also man-made carbon dioxide compared to carbon dioxide that's naturally in the air is minuscule. And even if it wasn't, it doesn't matter, because CO2 is a trace gas. There's much more water vapor in the air. Why aren't we concerned about water? Why don't we have a bold action plan?
Because water vapor makes up 90 to 95% of the greenhouse effect.
So why doesn't Bernie Sanders have a bold action to combat water? Well, because it's not about the climate. It's not about the well-being of humanity, et cetera, et cetera. It's about austerity. It's a devious political agenda that is covered in talking points and doomsday propaganda, and people have to start paying attention to this.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, I want to add something about the IPCC, because I don't know if you remember, I believe the head was, I don't know if he still is, Phil Jones. His emails were hacked back in 2012. Do you remember this?
Is that the University of St. Anglia in the UK? East Anglia. Yeah. So I think the guy's name was Phil Jones, but he was the head, I think, of the climate science department of the University of East Anglia. His emails get the University of St. Anglia has been also very prominent in the citations, and they've been very prominent in supplying the IPCC with
exactly
religious doomsday propaganda.
That's why I wanted to bring this up, is that Phil Jones' emails get hacked, and he literally has emails in there saying how he wants to modify data to hide the medieval warming period when the CO2 level was very low in the atmosphere, but the temperature was warmer, suggesting that the correlation might not be between CO2, and to change the peer review process so scientists who create papers that are dissenting toward this climate change propaganda can be kicked out. to put it softly. And I want to emphasize that anytime you hear somebody quoting or using the IPCC as some sort of reference for scientific basis or understanding on the climate, you can just throw it out.
Yeah.
You can just instantaneously assume that it's propaganda.
So the IPCC are the ones making the claims of catastrophic global warming. They are the ones who originate. I mean, ultimately, it goes back to the Club of Rome. In the book they wrote called The First Global Revolution, or The Next Global Revolution. Which one was it? I don't know. They wrote that catastrophic climate and climate change would fit the bill to unite humanity against itself, and that was the best enemy they could conjure up. They tried aliens, etc., and it hasn't really worked well. It's kind of, at this point, it's just kind of ridiculous. But the IPCC are the ones making the claim of catastrophic global warming. They're handing it down to all the collaborating governments all over the world, or all the complicit governments all over the world, to push all this nonsense on their own populations.
Garbage.
And to cite them to make the case, or to cite the group that is making the claim of catastrophic global warming as evidence for catastrophic global warming is ridiculous. It's a ridiculous approach. It just shows that you haven't dealt with the subject matter for 10 minutes. Because if you know how scientific evidence works, if you know how scientific research works, then you know that you have to read peer-reviewed science papers and not go to some government organization, or, as I like to refer to them, a religious doomsday cult, and cite their own claims from their own doomsday reports.
Yeah, well, and I want to add one more thing to that, which is the IPCC and people that I see promoting this stuff are constantly quoting computer models.
Right.
And I want to say this. So I didn't do climate modeling when I was in university. I did different chemistry modeling, where we were looking more at, like, okay, let's look at the potential different surface area of zeolites to have an idea of which might make the best catalyst. And then you have the computational model where you put the atoms together and you say, okay, I want these force fields to be calculated, and I want to throw water in it or whatever and see how it interacts. And you run this model in order to get an idea of what it maybe could be like. And so the idea with these zeolites, they're substance that has a lot of surface area, and there's different ways to make them. And the idea is, well, how would we find out, if there's thousands of different zeolites, what could have the best surface area to make the best catalyst? And the idea is, well, let's run a few of them on the computational models, and then we'll see which ones might be good to turn around and test. Right? It's not that we found it on the computational models. We go, oh, we found the best one. It's this one. No. You use the computational models to get an idea of where you should be testing. So the idea that you're running these climate models, and I mean, climate is way more complicated than, looking at surface areas of zeolites.
Just the idea of a global temperature to begin with. I mean, they're really dragging us into a very stupid debate, and it's already very annoying. But the idea of a global climate is such a ridiculous idea, of a global temperature. What does that mean? The Earth is an immensely complex ecosystem with different climates all over the place. Sometimes heats up here, sometimes cools down there, etc. And to create an average out of that is such a ridiculous. There's actually a Nobel Prize winner, Norwegian Nobel Prize winner, who talks about this on YouTube. If you look at Nobel laureate destroys climate alarmism or something like that, you probably find it. But he just talks about, I mean, just all these basic premises that these mind manipulators hit us over the head with, and then we ignore them. We jump into some a really stupid debate with them. But what is a global temperature? There's no such thing. It's a number that is meaningless, in my opinion, and in Nobel laureate's opinion as well. And by the way, I just want to mention, by the way, there's a peer-reviewed research study from 2015 that perfectly correlates temperature changes on Earth to sun cycle, to sunspot cycles, with perfect correlation. That fact alone, and it's always ignored because it's inconvenient, but that fact alone completely demolishes any suggestion that CO2 could have a significant role. Because if the climate so perfectly correlates with the sun, that would indicate that there's huge impact on the part of the sun when it comes to influencing Earth's climate. And, that's something that has been actually known for decades, if not even for centuries and thousands of years. People have always known that the sun is very important to our livelihoods. It's the source of all our energy. So
it's not that strange to come up with a hypothesis that the sun might be one of the main driving factors. It's hot in the summer and
cold in the winter. It's like, can you not figure that part out? But I mean, there's actually I just want to some quick
finish up. Let's move on. We're getting into it.
Guide to Climate Change by Mark Moreno. Numerous scientific organizations have signed on to the consensus without ever polling their membership. Okay, so you might have scientific organizations that say, we now decree that climate change is real, as if that's how science works, right? The scientists who originated the greenhouse gas theory of global warming also believed that exposing children to electricity would make them smarter. Ice ages have occurred when carbon dioxide levels were up to 10 times as high as they are today. Okay? So were the mammoths back then driving around in SUVs? Yeah.
It was their farts.
Exactly.
It was totally their farts. Because haven't you heard? Have you not seen articles talking about how cows are bad for the climate?
That's why. I mean, that's what they're doing. They're also putting limitations on the amount of cows, etc. I mean, everything is on the chopping block. If this nonsense goes through, you have no idea what is. I mean, everything is on the chopping block when they get.
Yeah, because they can come after anything. Because if carbon dioxide is the problem, that's every human thing that we do, whether that's biologically or industrially, right now.
Yeah, every human thing, but every chemical and scientific toxin that's injected into the atmosphere. Oh, that's fine. We don't worry about that. That's all allowed. Rising temperatures precede rising SEO level. Rising temperatures precede levels. Rising CO2 levels in ice core data. So this is from the first Al Gore propaganda piece. What's it called again? An Inconvenient Truth. An Inconvenient Truth, where Al Gore, the eminent scientist Al Gore, except he's not a scientist at all. He's just a rich kid from Tennessee. But he presents this chart of rising CO2 and rising temperatures based on ice core data over millions and millions of years. So he said, I don't know about you. I mean, I'm not an expert, but I can see here that the temperature goes up when the CO2 goes up. Except what he doesn't do, this sleazy, sneaky little rich kid bastard, is to zoom in on the chart so you can see that the temperatures rise first, and then the CO2 rises, and the lag is just an insignificant 800 years. But that's not important enough, I guess, to show you. He'd just rather show it to you from far away, so you don't see that. Polar bears.
I think he's too busy making out with his Nobel Prize.
Polar bears are doing so well that climate campaigners have dropped them as their icon. Sea level rise rates have not accelerated for over a century. Antarctica is gaining ice. Have you heard that recently on CNN?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I've been hearing that. Oh, I didn't know that CNN said it.
Antarctica is gaining ice. Yeah, did you ever hear that on the freak out corporate propaganda?
CNN is a hate group, by the way. I don't know if anybody.
The 1990 UN climate report showed a medieval warm period warmer than the 20th century. They of course, subsequently they eliminated that.
The Vikings were farming in Greenland, dude.
Exactly. Studies reveal the world was in a cooling trend from the Roman Middle Ages to the 20th century. From the Roman and Middle Ages to the 20th century. I believe that's also referred to as the Little Ice Age. Reputable scientists, so naturally you would expect for temperatures to go up a little bit after the Little Ice Age. Reputable scientists have called the hockey stick graph exaggerated and embarrassment, which is also why they've of course dropped the hockey stick chart now, and they've apparently completely forgotten that they utilized it to scare the crap out of everyone and push through laws all over the world restricting carbon emissions, etc. Okay.
Well, let me say this about the hockey stick graph. Sorry, real quick. I was reading an article. This was years ago. Don't ask me to remember where it came from. Maybe you read this as well, where someone took the formula that they were using to figure out the graph for the hockey stick graph, and they put random noise, no data, random noise into the formula, and it still spat out a hockey stick graph.
Yes.
So, because they tried putting all these different types of data, and at the very end, they stuck in random noise, and every single one gave them a hockey stick graph. So,
yeah, because their model just 0 times this, whatever you put in, and then adds their constant to produce a hockey chart. So, hottest year claims. You hear this every year. Hear this. Hottest year claims in 2005, 2010, 2015, and 2016 were based on statistically meaningless year-to-year differences, essentially within the margin of error. Folks,
that's my favorite.
Do you understand what these sick people are? They are taking irrelevant, meaningless noise and elevating it to the level of alarmism, to the point where they need you to change your entire lifestyle. Global warming has seen a slowdown or pause since 1998, right? Which is kind of curious because
that's roughly when Al Gore hit the stage.
Well, 1998 through now is when the economies of China and India started really coming online. And I believe the industrial output of CO2 from 1998 through today, so the past 20 years, makes up something like 60 to 70% of all post-industrial revolution CO2 emissions. So if your hypothesis was open to empirical examination, then here's a great test. We have one of the periods of the most man-made CO2 ever emitted onto planet Earth, and the Earth has not only has it not warmed more significantly than previously, but it hasn't warmed at all in that period. So there's a problem with your hypothesis if you're so scientific about everything.
But science is real, Nima. Science is real. I'm just going to say that over and over again until I get my way.
Science is the new modern day priesthood religion, and it's a brilliant scam, in my opinion. Tampering with the temperature record has been so widespread that the current climate era has been jokingly called the Adjustocene era. In recent decades, climate models have predicted much more warming than has actually occurred. Scientists have begun referring to climate model predictions as evidence and data. Okay?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say.
Exactly what you were just saying, yeah.
Go ahead.
They create models, and they say, and then people
they use that as data,
references as evidence, and then they think they're being scientific. Energy Secretary Stephen Chu was so enamored with climate models that he boasted, "We know the future." Which, we know how that went. They've been wrong over and over. Smears against climate skeptics have inspired numerous scientists to reevaluate the evidence and become skeptics. Scientific American branded a climatologist who changed her mind about global warming a heretic. Leftist scientists point out that the false global warming narrative hurts the world's poor. Okay, so that's enough bullet points.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think so. Bernie Sanders, potential Democrats, people who are wondering whether this is something to support. I don't know how you can have the idea of a Democrat who is supposed to be for the small guy. I mean, that's what my grandparents always talked about, who were staunch Democrats, being for the small guy, and simultaneously conform to this climate change garbage.
Because there's a new...
It annihilates the little guy.
There's a really dangerous and disgusting synthesis emerging out of all the different political movements in the past, and it's all moving towards green. That's why I think. That's why people on the left are willing to drop all their previous appeals to helping the little guy, helping the poor, and it's now becoming an anti-human movement, and it's taking in people from everywhere.
Yeah, that's a horrifying synopsis. Okay.
It's also what Alan Watt is saying, that that's the joke on the people is you can see it in the coloring, because in most countries the conservative versus the progressives, they're usually labeled blue or red. In the US, the conservatives are red and the liberals are blue, but in all European countries pretty much it's always the liberals or the lefties are red and the conservatives are blue. And based on our good old friend Hegelian dialectic, you take two different movements and you create a synthesis out of that. And we see it in the color coding here. The color green is what you get when you mix blue and red. And so the future is green. The
hold on. I have to be scientific in this. You get purple if you mix blue and red. Yellow and blue is green.
Oh, crap.
But your point is taken. you made your point. Sorry, the symbolic nature didn't work out.
You're right. Yeah, you're right.
Anyway, with that error, let's move on to the point 4. Holy shit, we're an hour into here. Point 4. Although I think this will go a little bit faster. That was our most... I think most of our emotion got put into those 3 points. Yeah. So the fourth one is comprehensive... that's point 5. Point 4 is fixing our broken criminal justice system. We must end the absurdity of the United States having more people in jail than any other country on earth. We must invest in jobs and education for our young people, not more jails and incarceration. I actually agree with this a lot.
Yes.
Particularly the fact we got so many non-violent drug users in jail.
Yeah, Trump agrees with it too.
But I do have to say this. So there was the first half of this saying, we have to end the absurdity of so many people in jail. Agreed. But then he says we must invest in jobs and education for our young people.
He always adds that at the end of every point, I think.
But I mean, the contractors building the schools are the same contractors who build the prisons. And I graduated high school in 2005. And when I was in freshman and sophomore in high school, we were actually still using the high school that was built in the 20s. And it had grown so much that there were all these outbuildings and portables and stuff to handle the increasing population over the last 80 years. And there was this constant barrage of, we need a new high school. We need a new high school. We need a new high school. And so we finally got it in my junior year. They finished building it. And I went to this new high school. And it was literally like a fucking prison where, because of the old high school, there was a lot of wandering around. You could leave for lunch and it was there was we had truancy officers and stuff, but it was more or less your problem to get to class because everything was so wide and spread out. This here, there's one way to get in, one way to get out of simply the parking lot. Then there was one way to get in, one way to get out of the building itself. And then there was 4 different wings that were attached to the central body. And the only way to get to adjacent wing was to come into the central body where everyone had to like slam into each other and try to run off to their next class. And I literally, so in Washington State, we have something called Running Start, which allows high school students to go to community college, and the state will pay for the classes. I literally went to Running Start because I couldn't handle the prison-like feeling of the new high school because I knew what the previous one had been like.
Schools were created to turn us into good little worker slaves and good little soldier slaves. So it makes perfect sense. It's just people have the idea that schools were created to educate us, and I always have a problem with these kinds of statements. We must invest in jobs and education for young people. You know, who's we? Is it Bernie Sanders and his wife? Okay, if that's what you want to do, do it. If that's your opinion, fine. But they always use this high and mighty language to basically tell everyone else what to do. I mean, and this is weird mindset to want to tell people what to do and to be such a control.
Well, and it's a similar argument that we were talking about with the Medicare for all, which is, okay, you're gonna spend all this money on this system that really, really fucking sucks and make that bigger and nastier. Well, same thing with the public educational system. It's like, okay, you're gonna dump all this money into it and make it so we get more of this bad product. Great. Right. Where do I sign? So, yes, let's fix the broken criminal justice system, but no more prison schools, please.
Yeah, I mean, you have a problem with people paying less than $15 an hour. Okay, then pay people more than $15 an hour, right? Same idea.
Yeah.
Don't try to tell everyone what to do. It's just has a very weird finger wagging granny.
Narcissistic control freak. Yeah. Point 5. Let's move on to point 5 here. Comprehensive immigration reform. The American people want to protect young people in the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program and to move toward comprehensive immigration reform for the more than 11 million people in our country who are undocumented. And that's exactly what we should do. I mean, yeah, I completely agree that we need comprehensive immigration reform. Yeah, take them in your home. This conspicuously sounds like let's just make all the illegals illegal. Or let's make all the illegals legal. Right. What do we do with these 11 million undocumented people in our country?
And also the American...
They're just like everybody else. They just don't have documents.
The American people want to protect... who is the American people? You know, it's like now he's speaking for the American people. It's ridiculous. Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals was an illegal executive order, as far as I remember. As far as I'm concerned, it's meaningless. And if people want to immigrate to this country, there are ways to do that. Nobody's against that. And so what does that mean? Comprehensive immigration reform for them. So if you want to change the immigration laws, if you want to change the process of how people immigrate, okay, then go for it. But people...
Yeah, what is it? This is very unclear how he wants to change it.
People who violated previous immigration laws... so he says here, we want immigration reform for the people who didn't immigrate, essentially, for people who violated our immigration laws. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Nope. Okay, moving on. Unless you had something else there.
And I'm an immigrant. So, you know, I have nothing against immigration. But there are ways to do it and there are ways not to do it. And if you don't do it right, then you can try again, buddy. That's my opinion.
I don't know if I should say this on something that's going to be publicly available for the next rest of eternity, but I have it written on my website, so whatever. Did I ever tell you, Nima, I got caught being an illegal on the Slovenian-Croatian border?
No, you never told me that.
I overstayed in the Schengen zone when I went to Europe because I was like, fuck it, the Mexicans do it here. It must be a great idea. I was only allowed to stay for 3 months, and I'd been there for 6, and I tried to cross the border of Slovenia, Croatia, and Croatia was not in Schengen at the time. I think it is now. And I had one stamp in my passport, and the border guard looked at me just like, what the fuck are you doing, man?
Yeah.
He was actually very nice to me, and kind of gave me this stern warning and said, I'm essentially not going to put a passport in your, or I'm not going to put a stamp in your passport. So when you come back into Slovenia, tell them that you were in Croatia for 4 months, and you'll get a new stamp in your passport, and you'll be good for another 3 months. And I'm thinking, did this guy just tell me how to lie to the next guy to get back in? And I said, yes, sir. And when I got back in, I fucking got my paperwork together.
Well, maybe it's such a common occurrence, so they think, oh, it's just, again, one of those stereotypical Americans overstaying in their Schengen zone in Slovakia or whatever. Slovenia?
Yep.
Yeah.
I was staying in Austria, but we were going to Croatia. I was staying with a blacksmith, and we had to fix his dad's boat in Croatia.
That's illegal labor.
I ended up in a lot of... What's
That's
that?
Illegal labor abroad.
Man, I had it all going on when I was in Europe. Anyway, okay, moving on. That's a story time for later. So, progressive tax reform. Fuck whatever Stephanie Kelton has to say. We want progressive tax reform. Okay. At a time of massive and growing inequality of both income and wealth, Congress must pass legislation which requires wealthy people and large corporations to begin paying their fair share of taxes. It is unacceptable that there are large and extremely profitable corporations in this country that do not pay a nickel in federal income taxes. And that do not pay a nickel is hyperlinked. And it goes to an article about how corporations aren't paying taxes, and then it completely confuses corporate and federal taxes. In fact, I'm going to click on it right now. Here's the article. We'll have this in below. This is by the New York Times. Complaining that the United States has one of the world's highest corporate tax levels, President Trump and congressional Republicans have repeatedly vowed to shrink it. Yet if the level is so high, why do so many companies' income tax bills add up to zero? Because they're not the same fucking thing! God damn! Ugh. I mean, I don't even know what to say. It's just like you don't get the tax code. I mean, I understand why you don't get the tax code because it's totally fucking gnarly. But if you don't get the tax code, why are you talking about it like you do? Like you do. So, yeah, as we know as MMTers, and how I would think Bernie Sanders should know with his economic advisor being an MMTer, even the leftist MMTers are for a 0% corporate tax rate because they understand it's nothing but a pass-through tax that punishes the end consumer. And chases off industry to other countries. And on top of it, the tax money isn't needed to pay for stuff. It not only does it make sense to talk about somebody's fair share of taxes because there's never any way to ever define what the fair share is. Once you understand MMT and how the economic system actually works, fair share of taxes even further doesn't make sense because it doesn't actually pay for anything.
It's true. I mean, as Warren Mosler has said before, any corporate tax is essentially just a pass through to the consumer. And also Minsky promoted a zero corporate tax rate. And the recent tax bill lowered it, I think, to 22 or something. I'm kind of worried that what Trump did may not have been enough, or what he was able to push through in the end wasn't enough. And also,
totally wasn't enough.
I think actually the corporate ones, they don't expire, so that's a good thing at least. But a lot of the tax cuts are set to expire, so with Democrats in control in Congress now, I think there's real there are reasons to be concerned about the U.S. economy down the road, because if the taxes go back up, then less money in people's pockets, and austerity is back on track. And then, it might all end up culminating in a pretty bad recession.
Well, let me counter that a little bit, which is when the tax cuts got passed, I was hyper on top of it because I've been learning a lot about taxes for individuals and small business. And honestly, because there's really three different types of taxable entities in the country. There's individual or sole proprietor, small business, even if you are a corporation, you're still a small business if you have like under 500 employees, and big business. And having the corporate tax being adjusted, I think it was like from 35 to 21 for the highest bracket percent. That was by far the hugest thing in the tax cuts. Everything else was like pennies. The individual got shafted and the small business got shafted. I mean, we were giving crumbs, like Nancy Pelosi said. I'll take the crumbs, but it was what the non-corporations got were definitely crumbs. The biggest one was the corporate taxes, and if that one's permanent, it makes me feel a little bit better from an MMT standpoint, knowing that the Democrats are back in control of the House.
But not if Bernie gets his way.
Yeah, not if Bernie gets his way. Oh man. Yeah, if you didn't like us, and then one thing that always gets me about this fair share of taxes thing. So he attacks the federal income tax, and anybody who starts getting enough money to either learn this themselves or hire the lawyers to figure it out for them, and the tax accountants and stuff, that income has a very, very, very specific definition in terms of the tax world, and wealthy people learn how to earn money which isn't income, where the federal income tax therefore doesn't apply to it. So when you start gaining a lot of assets and you start being involved in a lot of business, you learn how to massage the tax code, because they call it loopholes, but honestly the tax code is just set up for this, to make sure that your money comes to you not in a form of income, whether that's through retirement accounts or trusts or passive income or investments or write-offs. So the S corporation, learning how to write off everything that you're doing, and blah 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 blah. The people who get hit the hardest when you talk about, okay, we need to have a certain bracket system where the higher earners are paying most of the income tax. The people who are getting hit the hardest are the middle class, who aren't doing all this crazy shit with their tax returns, who are just trying to work and earn money. Maybe they earned $250,000 in 1 year. Well, they get pummeled because they don't understand how the tax code works. So they say, oh, how do I make this not be, in quotes, income? How do I funnel this somewhere else so it's not income? So all these progressive tax points, unless they address the fundamental point of the tax code, which is it's designed to have people be able to manipulate it in order to not have to pay as many taxes as you would have if you just had it be income. And unless you address that, you're just punishing people who work hard. That's it.
Yeah, taxes just exist to make some people poorer than others.
That is an excellent way to put it. Okay. I think we're on 7. Was that 6? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, we're on 7. Okay, I actually like this one. A $1 trillion infrastructure plan. Every day, Americans drive to work on potholed roads and crumbling bridges and ride in overcrowded buses and subways. Children struggle to concentrate in overcrowded classrooms. Workers are unable to find affordable housing. The structures that most Americans don't see are also in disrepair, from spotty broadband and an outdated electric grid to toxic drinking water and dilapidated levees and dams. Congress should pass a $1 trillion infrastructure plan to address these needs while creating up to $15 million or 15 million good-paying jobs in the process. I actually think if we have to have government spending in order to have a private sector net savings, I think infrastructure is the first thing that it needs to go to.
Yeah, and also 1 trillion is actually pretty modest, honestly, because from what I've heard, the requirements to get up to par with comparable or with other countries, it would have to be much higher than that, actually.
More like 10 trillion.
I think so, yeah.
And I mean, I know Bernie threw in all the lefty affordable housing, whatever that means. The children are struggling in overcrowded classrooms, as if them being there in the first place is good. But
that's always the assumption.
It's always the assumption. But I mean, yeah, there's places with toxic drinking water, and the electrical grid is outdated. And there's I don't know enough about broadband to say one thing or the other, but I do know when I was in Romania, the Romanians bragged that they were the third fastest internet in the world, and I'm like, well, where's the United States? I think it was like 11th or something at the time, and I'm like, fuck, how was Romania faster than the United States? So apparently we have a shitty internet network.
Yeah. Yeah, Romania is known
up?
to have a pretty good infrastructure. I've heard that as well.
They can't handle toilet paper in public bathrooms, but they got a pretty good internet structure.
No, sorry, I meant internet specifically.
Yeah, you go to Romania, bring your own toilet paper. Word to the wise. Yeah, and then again, if we have to have government spending for the private sector to have private sector net savings, I really think infrastructure is like where you need to start in order to have a functioning system. Do you?
Yeah, it's like doing an upgrade in your house. Makes your house better and worth more and more livable. So making our infrastructure better makes our lives more livable, I guess.
Okay, number 8. Lowering the price of prescription drugs. We're finally to this one. Americans pay by far the highest price in the world for prescription drugs because, unlike other countries, the United States doesn't regulate the price of medicine. That's why. That's why we pay too much. The House should pass legislation to require Medicaid to negotiate for lower drug prices and allow patients... Medicare to negotiate for lower drug prices and allow patients, pharmacists, and wholesalers to purchase low-cost prescription drugs from Canada and other countries. It should also pass legislation to make sure that Americans don't pay more for prescription drugs than the citizens do in other major countries. Now, before I address price, I want to point out an assumption here that I've been trying to address, particularly when we talked about Medicare for All earlier, which is the assumption that we need these drugs en masse to begin with. Right? We've got all these diseases and all these healthcare problems that are simply lifestyle, food, supplemental, and stress related. I think you could say very comfortably that 90% of the illness that we experience in probably in the world, but we'll just say this country, is a result of that. So the fact that everybody needs to be blasted with these pharmaceutical drugs, I think, is an issue in and of itself, particularly if you watch any pharmaceutical commercial where half the commercial is listing the side effects that include homicidal and suicidal thoughts. But the problem is the Second Amendment.
I mean, Americans have a fetish for pharmaceutical drugs, and if you've grown up here, it's maybe a little less apparent than when you move here. I moved here from Europe, from Germany specifically, and I just found it bizarre. Like the stuff that people take chemical drugs for, like a little cough or some snivelly nose.
It's something you should be taking an herb for that you could find out in your yard.
Yeah, and also you have to allow your body to fight the disease a little bit. I mean, if you take drugs from early age on, then your body doesn't really become very resistant, and then you become permanently susceptible to these diseases. Yeah, I mean, but
addressing what he's saying here. Yeah, well, we think the idea that the fact that drugs are so expensive isn't a result of the fact that the United States doesn't regulate the price. It might have something to do with the fact that it takes 15 years and $1 billion to get a drug through the FDA, or the fact that Obamacare is
kind of
run by. Yeah, it's an opposite. So I agree with him that wholesalers should be allowed to purchase drugs from Canada and other countries. I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do.
And also, I agree that Medicare should negotiate. It's ridiculous. It's actually currently, it's part of the Medicare law, from what I understand. Medicare is not allowed to negotiate for lower drug prices, even though Medicare is the single largest buyer of drugs in the country.
Oh man, can you give me a textbook example of crony capitalism?
Yeah, what a windfall!
We're in the wrong business.
Yeah,
we need to be like FDA mafioso pharmaceutical dudes. I'm joking.
Well,
I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I did that.
Definitely fun conventions in the Caribbean or whatnot.
Okay, let's get to number 9. I want to dissect this one a little bit, because I think this is something important that libertarians need to hear. So number 9 is making public colleges and universities tuition free and substantially reducing student debt. In a highly competitive global economy, we must have the best educated workers in the world. Every young person in America, regardless of income, must have the opportunity to receive the education they need to get a decent job and make it into the middle class. The House should pass a College for All Act to make public colleges and universities tuition free and substantially reduce student debt. So first of all, I want to address the student debt side of things. Now that I understand MMT, I fully support a Jubilee-style clearing of all student debts instantaneously now, as long as it's followed with no more government funding of university, either directly or through student loans. Because student loans, as comparing these to what we've talked about in ancient times, where debt slavery literally meant that it's very recent that you don't become enslaved for not being able to pay your debts, because that's the way it used to work for thousands and thousands of years. If you couldn't pay your debts, you got sold into slavery, and your family got sold into slavery.
If you can't pay your alimony debts, I think we still technically have debtors' prisons in this country.
Yes, and alimony and child support both fall into that category, and I think everything I'm saying here applies to that as well. Although that one gets a little more complicated because there's a child to take care of and blah, blah, blah. With the student debt, the students who go to university have been utterly and totally sold a bill of goods, going through the public educational system, getting told for 12 years that the road to success is to go to university, get good grades, and you'll get a good job. They've been completely lied to. The media's completely lied to them. The government's completely lied to them. Society as a whole has completely lied to them. For them to take on $30, $40, $50, $100,000 in debt. And that's just principal. If you put 8% interest on that sucker, you can almost double it in half. If you have an 8% interest rate on $100,000 for 30 years, and you pay every payment for over 30 years, you're actually paying $260,000, not $100,000. It's bad.
So to ask I want to test your Minsky knowledge. What kind of financing position does that represent?
What do you mean?
Well, remember the different types?
Ponzi. Right?
Ponzi, yeah. I mean, it could be speculative or even Ponzi, depending on the income you expect to earn.
Right. Well, and then, I mean, we always say, well, we need universities for doctors and lawyers and stuff, which I just largely disagree with. I don't think you need 20 years of school to become a doctor. But, for all these students graduating with, women's studies degrees and shit, all these arts degrees, and let's take the lower end of it, the $30,000 in debt. If we go by Minsky standards, Ponzi means you're unable to pay the interest and you're unable to pay the principal.
Yeah.
That's exactly what this is. And you can't bankrupt out of student debt. And I was even reading articles that they're taking away driver's licenses in 20 states for people who don't pay back their student debts. Did you hear about that?
No.
What the fuck is that? Particularly in the United States, when if you don't have a car, you don't have shit. I mean, unless you live like in a major metropolitan area and you can actually take the subway. If you don't have a car, you can't get a job. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
So we're starting to see similar debt slavery in the sense that we spoke about before. I guess you're not getting sold into slavery, more that you're just simply becoming an outcast.
Right.
Who's going to marry you? You'll never get a job that can suitably pay down this debt. And so you just live in this quasi state of I can never do anything for the rest of my life because I went to school and I was sold this bill of goods that it was going to be the best thing for me ever. So yeah, I completely say completely wipe all student debt now, and in the future, if there is the possibility to get financing for college, make it so you can go bankrupt out of it.
Yeah.
Totally ridiculous.
Reminds me of this meme where some guy walks into an office with a piece of paper and he says, "I'd like to return this. It's unused." And then she goes, "This is your diploma." And then he goes, "Cash is fine."
I saw that one was awesome. That's exactly what it is. It's exactly what it is. So on the flip side of this, back to Bernie Sanders, making public colleges and universities tuition free. This again goes back to let's throw more money so people could buy the bad product thing. Yeah. Why do we want to send kids to college? Because he says in here, every American, regardless of the income, must have the opportunity to receive the education they need to get a decent job and make it into the middle class. Sure. What the fuck does that have to do with a university these days?
Yeah.
Because it's not a good education and it's not going to get you into the middle class. It's going to put you into debt slavery. So again, I thought the Democrats were supposed to be for the little guy, like my grandparents always told me. But yeah, that's nonsense. I think they're more interested in debt slavery. Yeah. Although if we've learned anything from Dinesh D'Souza, slavery has always been one of their big end games.
Indeed.
Do you have anything more on that before I go to 10?
Well, I mean, it's also, I think a lot of these people who propose this stuff are academics, and they...
You mean Marxists?
Yeah, and so they somehow just assume that everyone needs to be an academic because they're obviously such awesome individuals, and who could ever question that? So
they create so much. They produce so many things.
Kind of a blind spot they have. Like, maybe you're just a shitty loser. Has that ever occurred to you? But it doesn't, of course.
It can't occur to me. I'm a narcissist.
Exactly.
Psychologically incapable of having that occur to me. Okay. Number 10, expanding Social Security. I'm curious your feelings on this one because I have a very non-libertarian view on this. So when 1 out of 5 seniors is trying to get by on less than $13,500 a year, we must expand Social Security so that every American can retire with dignity and security. The House should pass legislation to expand Social Security benefits and extend its solvency for the next 60 years by requiring that the wealthiest Americans, those making more than $250,000 a year, pay their fair share of Social Security taxes. So first, I want to say I actually agree with, at least in the short term, expanding Social Security. And when I say expand, I mean like double it. Because it's no joke that some people retired people who have worked all their lives are living off of like $600 a month. It's nuts. And if we don't have to raise taxes like Bernie Sanders is suggesting here in order to do that, I don't really see why a reason we shouldn't. I think it's an issue that old people get to this state and they need the government assistance. But the fact that we have millions and millions and millions and millions of old people just living off of cat food, particularly when they've worked their whole lives, I think is in a similar societal boat to putting the students into debt slavery. What do you think?
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, I guess we've gotten to this point thanks to austerity where nobody has accumulated sufficient assets to finance their retirement. So what do we do? What do we do with the people who can't work anymore? That is a problem. That's a challenge.
Yeah.
And the market's probably.
Did you know that when I read this somewhere, if someone wanted to fact check it and get back to me, that'd be great. When the Social Security Administration was first created and they set the retirement age at 65, at the time, the average life expectancy was 62.
Yeah.
So the idea behind Social Security was that, most people are dead by this time. So in the rare event you have somebody living this long, we'll pay for it.
Yeah. I mean, everything and pretty much anything can be done here. Financially, there are no limitations. There's no issue. Social Security isn't going broke. We actually recorded a podcast about that a long time ago. So it's a political choice. How much do we want to contribute, or what do we think is reasonable for someone who's contributed to a program all their life to retire? I mean, the money has been taken from them, so there should be something in return. And the alternative to that is just make it all completely private. But that alternative doesn't apply to those who are where we are at this point, right?
Exactly.
So, I mean, ultimately,
that's why I say a short-term solution, because ultimately I would like it where nobody has to depend on the government in their later years. But like I said, we got the baby boomers maturing, and we could talk shit about baby boomers all day, but I mean that's still grandma and grandpa living off of cat food when they did work their whole lives.
Yeah.
I think another issue with this is actually a cultural one in the United States, because when I've traveled, this whole idea that you kick a kid out of the house the instant he turns 18, no other country thinks that way.
Right.
And my guess is this has a lot to do with the public educational system, which is designed to make you not trust your parents. I mean, one of the things it does is to make sure that you don't get your teaching from your parents, you get it from the school system, so they make you distrust your parents. But there's this really huge gap that gets created between generations here that I think is very unnatural, and the evidence of that is that no other country that I know of does it. I mean, it's totally normal, like in Europe, to stay in your parents' house until you're like 26 to get your shit figured out.
Yeah, I mean,
to move somewhere else.
I don't know if I would want to stay in my parents' house until I was 26, but and the fact that it's done that way in many other countries doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right way of doing it. But I mean, you may have a point there. I mean, another point, since we're talking about retirement.
My point wasn't the 26. It was just that there's appears to be more familial support. And if you need help and you have to stay in your parents' house for a few more years, it's not, the parents aren't like, oh, get the fuck out of here. You're eating my
another
food.
Thing that's also in other countries in Europe, at least Germany, where I grew up, it's pretty normal to have a government pension, or to have Social Security that pays you enough to survive in your old age. And it's basically all government Social Security for the most part. Some people have private investments on top of that, but that's more the wealthy. But for regular people, it's pretty normal to just have a government pension when you retire. And out here, it's more like it's this extra thing. Social Security pays you a little bit, but you need more on top of that. So it's just a cultural difference. And like I said, it's a political choice ultimately. Financially, there's no limitations here. It's a political decision as to whether or not we want to have public money contributing to the retirement of people in their old age. I mean, are there people who say, well, we should get rid of Social Security altogether, no matter what, and who have a solution for what to do with old retirees right now? I'd be curious. I mean, maybe there is a solution. I'm not aware of one.
Well, one of the things that Warren Mosler was saying, I don't remember if he said this to us directly or I listened to him say it before in a different, actually, I think it was in the debate with Bob Murphy, is that when, and this was him talking about the federal job guarantee, which obviously doesn't apply to the seniors, but I want to draw a principle out of it, where if he suggested, okay, let's have this federal transition job, and don't touch the unemployment office, don't touch the welfare office, just leave everything as it is, and let's see how the population shifts and see if people naturally come off unemployment. Because his opinion was that naturally people don't want to be unemployed. Like, yeah, I mean, there's a small percentage of welfare bumps, sure. But largely the people who are unemployed don't want to be. And if they were given the option, they would prefer to work. So I think if we were going to come up with something to replace it, it would be something where it would be like what Warren Mosler proposed. Is like, okay, let's introduce this this other thing. Leave the Social Security alone. Just don't touch it. And let's see if we can make this other thing so much better that we don't even need it, the other thing anymore. I think it would have to be something like that. And as you said before, if we can get out of austerity measures where the coming generations can actually have enough private sector net savings saved up that they could do something, that they could retire on their own money, that would help.
Exactly.
Well, that was point 10. Do you have anything more on point 10?
Yeah.
Actually, I do. So,
right.
FICA taxes. So, Bernie brings this up at the end that they pay the people making more than $250,000 a year pay their fair share of social security taxes, which are FICA taxes or self-employment taxes, depending on how you're earning your money. Total garbage, nonsense. The FICA taxes are probably the most regressive tax that we have in our system. It punishes the employee for working. It punishes the employer for hiring somebody. And it punishes the self-employed for creating his own business. Punishes everybody for absolutely nothing. It does not pay for Social Security. He says right here, the House should pass legislation to expand Social Security benefits that extend its solvency for the next 60 years. Social Security is already solvent. It doesn't, like you said, there's no financial issue here. Social Security can't be insolvent because the government just makes the money.
Yeah, I guess Stephanie Kelton wasn't in the room when he wrote that one down.
No kidding.
I guess.
Man.
Because he's obviously a very attentive old man, so he can't be missing that.
Can't be missing that. And then, you always have to ask if these rules apply to him. How many houses does he own? 6? Shouldn't he be paying his fair share of housing by, how many how many undocumented immigrants can you fit in those 6 houses, Bernie? Let me know.
Yeah.
Okay. Nima, unless you have anything more to add, I think you can close us out.
So I think this was a nice little break from ancient Sumerian, Gilgamesh, etc. epics. This has been Amagi, hosted by myself, Nima Mahjour of economicsjunkie.com, and Dylan Moore of the Volitional Science Network, which you can find on YouTube. And we are, of course, being hosted by the Think Liberty Network, which you can find at think-liberty.com. Thank you very much for listening, and we will see you next time.